So you're pro-segregation. CRT argues for black-only spaces and white-only spaces. Is that evil or is that good? So it plays into this false narrative that black people are threatened by white people. If you are saying that blacks should have their own bathrooms and whites should have their own bathrooms, you are no better than a KKK leader in the 1950s. The extrapolation is they actively argue for discrimination against white people. How about you pick one and I'll dissect it?
I don't know any currently critical.
Bingo, because you don't know very much about the topic. Should black people get reparations?
Should black people get reparations? I believe they should.
So I, white man, have to play for black people. Why?
Wow, that's a really selfish thing you just said.
Hold on. Why should I have...
That's a really non-empathetic thing to say.
Why should I have empathy for a race? I have white guilt because I breathe?
You're breathing in really hateful dialect.
No,
Sir.
factual dialect, because you don't like it.
Also, I know that one of the stances you take is against critical race theory.
Yes, that's right.
What's your opinion on that? And just tell me what you think about it and what it
CRT is repugnant racism.
Repugnant racism. Okay, can you go more into that? And why?
If you read Richard Delgado's Intro to Critical Race Theory, he believes that racism is normative. It's everywhere. It exists just as people exist. They believe skin color matters. I do not.
Yes.
I don't believe skin color means anything towards your value or to who you are as a human being. I care about your character, your code of conduct, and your soul, not your skin color.
That's a fair thing to believe in, but critical race theory believes that as well. It goes for the equality of races. All it does is teach the history of. I know this because I do.
So tell me, what does Richard Delgado argue in the Intro to Critical Race Theory as applicable policy reforms for structural and systemic racism?
Sir, you can't expect me to argue for something that I haven't learned yet.
No, I know.
If you let me
it's a little unfair for what I'm doing, but it is Intro to Critical Race Theory is his book.
Okay, but not every class is taught like that.
Fair enough.
For instance, my class is called Race and Ethnicities, and right now we're going into the history of race and how white people are systemically privileged.
So let me ask you a question. White people are not privileged, but let me ask you a question. Do you believe in black-only dormitories?
Black-only dormitories. What does that have to do with the conversation of critical race?
Because as a solving to racism on over 100 universities across the country, there are black-only dormitories. Is that good, bad, evil, wrong? What's your opinion?
I'm sorry, sir, but that's not part of the question I asked you.
Well, no, I'm asking you a question. It should be very simple. Black-only spaces, white-only spaces, good or bad?
I mean, sir, there are safe spaces for individuals.
Okay, so you're
hey,
pro-segregation.
I'm not pro-segregation because guess what, sir? You cut me off. So.
It's super easy, man. But I'll give him a chance. White-only spaces, black-only spaces, yes or no?
There are fine with spaces where there should be a flip.
Let him finish.
It's bad if it's forced. Just say yes or no. Bad if it's forced.
So whites are not allowed into the black spaces.
What? Here, let me ask you a question.
That's forced.
Let me ask you a question. Say for instance, there's a club. There's a club that is aimed towards these people. And also, I've never been a part of one of these clubs where they've excluded anyone, turned off the camera. Anyway, so
the camera's still on.
Yeah, well, it's not this. Anyway, it's okay for these spaces to exist as a safe space. It's okay for these spaces to exist.
So just make sure we're clear. So when the South had white-only restrooms, that was fine.
No, it wasn't.
That's exactly what we have on 100.
Not. If it's not forced, it's not that. It's
Hold on,
okay
it's
to be
forced.
safe amongst your people. And why would you want to be in a space that is taught to it's like for people. It's for people to accept their culture.
Wait a second. So it plays into this false narrative that black people are threatened by white people. Are they?
That's not.
Does the presence of white people threaten black people?
You've strayed very far from the critical race theory.
No, this is all what CRT believes in.
This is what you are about.
If you read Richard Delgado's Intro to Critical Race Theory,
they catch people off guard.
No,
when they come to go to one question.
It's not a trick.
It is a trick.
If you read the literature. Okay, so let me ask you a question. In Richard Delgado, in any one of these guys, right? Nicole Hannah-Jones. You read any of their literature, Ibram X. Kendi, Harry Rogers, what is their opinion of black-only dormitories?
I do not know their opinion.
They're in favor of them. CRT argues for black-only spaces and white-only spaces. Is that evil or is that good?
It's a broader question than that.
It is repugnantly evil to
Just
segregate
like you
people
say
based
that,
on race.
Hey, just
you
like
don't have to
say
overthink
I'm
it.
avoiding a question, you avoid them just as
what
well.
question am I avoiding?
Just because you have a little assembly over there.
What question am I avoiding?
Assembly over here too.
Wait, what question am I avoiding?
You're avoiding the question of why critical race theory is bad.
Because CRT argues for black-only spaces
But
and
I'm
white-only
saying
spaces.
It's a broader thing than that. They're not just arguing to separate people.
That's
They're
one of
arguing
many things
for
they're arguing.
Teaching the history of race and what it's done to our society.
First of all, they don't
throughout
teach it correctly.
history.
Secondly, the extrapolation is they actively argue for discrimination against white
Sorry,
people.
you say they didn't teach it correctly.
Yes, that's correct.
Why don't they teach it
Well, let's
correctly?
take one example. Nicole Hannah-Jones, the 1619 Project. She has been obliterated by fellow liberal scholars as making up history, revisionist history, not using original source documents,
Making up what kind of history, may I ask?
not quoting the founding fathers correctly, not using original source documents, using a motive type methodology. The 1619 Project is a joke by any academic discipline.
Do you feel it's not fair to judge an entire thing by one scholar?
Nicole Hannah-Jones is the leading CRT scholar in America, christened by the New York Times.
And there's always
how about this?
leading people.
How about Ibram X. Kendi, Harry Rogers? How about him, who's the second in command of the CRT regime? How about you pick one and I'll dissect it?
I don't know any currently critical.
Bingo, because you don't know very much
Critical
about the topic.
race theory has only existed for a little amount of time, less than other classes.
Okay.
We know less about it, and we're still researching it. Just like any other field of
But,
study, we
don't-
research it to get a better point.
Read the literature. The undercurrent of all CRT literature, whether it be Delgado, whether it be Nicole Hannah-Jones or Ibram X. Kendi, whether it be Marcuse or Derrida or Foucault or any of the postmodernists, they believe race matters, and you actively must construct society around race using power dynamics. Actively anti-white discrimination, anti-white sort of practices, affirmative action if necessary, black-only dormitories, black-only graduation ceremonies, black-only hiring practices. They believe race matters. In fact, that is Cornel West's book he wrote that says race matters. So where am I off stray in summarizing CRT? I've read the literature. I encourage you to too.
I will say, you're very educated on these people that have written
Yes,
books.
I know.
Yes.
This is what I do for a living.
I know it's what you do.
I read their books, so I know what this stuff is.
Yes, I know you do. But it is wrong to judge a subject. There is no hateful dialect in the class.
I'm not saying it's hateful. I'm saying
Yes, you are.
Well,
you are saying that the things that they teach are inherently
of course they
hateful.
are. If you are saying that blacks should have their own bathrooms and whites should have their own bathrooms, you are no better than a
But you
KKK
just
leader
said
in the
that
1950s.
Hey, you just said the critical race theories that are taught
Yes,
here
the
on campus are not hateful.
the
That
CRT
destroys the argument that you're speaking,
The-
that critical
the
race
fact-
theories spread to turn
The
people
fact you
against white
cannot
people.
speak against black-only dormitories shows the toxicity of CRT.
Well, you're bringing up a buzz term that is a
It's
very
not a buzz
big
term.
subject
It's a real
as small
example.
question. You're bringing up in a discussion.
It's
Hey,
happening in real time.
If I came up here and said,
It's
hey,
not
I
some
want to
academic
talk,
thing.
Listen, people doing black-only dormitories, that is a subject in itself. That is a question I could have came up and asked, and we could have discussed that. I did not. For instance, you used it as an argument. Okay, use it as an argument. Do not make it your main point.
But it is an
You've
example
turned
of
it
why
in-
CRT is a toxin.
But you've turned it into your main point. This is like one of the only things you brought up. And yes, I get that I get that you could see hateful rhetoric.
Let me ask
that's
you
not
another.
existing.
Let me ask you another example. Okay.
Sure.
Should black people get reparations?
Could black people get reparations? I believe they should.
Okay. So let me ask you. So, a black person that came here in the 1980s, are they entitled to reparations? They came from Nigeria or Dominican Republic.
May I ask you a question, sir? Because no,
Reparations comes from CRT.
reparations- Yeah, of course. Yes, of course. I believe in reparations for people that are
So
in a
I, white man, have to play for black people. Why?
Wow, that's a really selfish thing you
No,
just said.
hold on. Why should I
That's
have?
a really non-empathetic thing to
Wait,
say.
why should I have
Not
empathy
caring
for a
about
race?
people.
Why should I have empathy for a race? I have white guilt because I breathe?
I'm not saying for you to.
Why should the white students here have to work harder to pay for black kids?
Hey, you wanted to ask
What is that all about? Yeah. Like, what did we do to have to pay for black kids?
It would have been easier to give reparations back when slavery was abolished. Of course, it would be harder now. Do you think that people today, white people, benefited from their families owning slaves?
No.
Well, it is proven that people that do have slaves in their family are better off today.
So how did my family benefit when they fought in the Civil War to free the slaves?
Did they fight
On the Union cause. On the Union cause. So how did my family benefit from that?
Well, your benefit didn't. Your family didn't benefit.
Oh, but you said white people, so that's a big statement.
I said slave owners, and you heard me say slave.
No, hold on. We got to get more nuanced here. So there were tens of millions of white people that came post-slavery. How did they benefit? Via immigration. So like an Irish immigrant in 1905 benefited from slavery. How?
They didn't benefit from slavery.
So then how did, by the way, the slave owners had their plantations burned to the ground by the North. Many of them had to stand for war crimes. Many of them lost everything for a good reason, and they owned slaves. This idea that they had like an uninterrupted privilege walk for 150 years, that's not true.
I sure hope you're as passionate about talking about them being charged for war crimes as you are for other people in other countries being
they were tried for war crimes. That's why the part of the 14th Amendment was passed to try Southern
because not every black person has lineage connected to slaves.
That's
and
true.
Every white person doesn't have lineage connected to slaves.
Yes, that's right. So since every black person doesn't have a lineage connected to slaves, why should we generalize and say reparations for black people?
Because there are people that are in a worse place because their family was brought here as slaves, kept in sharecropping.
Got it. So over 150 years, they didn't have any ability to make better decisions, to save money, and to invest. It was such a big deal.
Are you blaming a person for being stuck in indentured servitude?
I'm blaming people for
You're
acting poor.
telling me if you were an indentured servant, you could rise to the top.
So
where you...
let me ask you, how did the Jews get so wealthy post-Holocaust?
Sir,
how did the Jews get so wealthy? How did the Asians get so wealthy?
You're bringing in really hateful dialect.
No,
sir,
factual dialect, because you don't like it. The Asians were internment camps. The Asians were put in internment camps, and they were the poorest group in America. And guess what? They're the richest in America now. The Jews had an extermination act against them in the Holocaust. They had nothing. Everything was stolen. And now they're the richest per capita in the Western world. Why?
America was built by
because
slaves.
They worked hard and they kept the family unit together. Blacks did that to the 1960s, and they stopped doing it.
This is incredibly racist.
It's a fact. It's not racist.
You're blaming black people for being put down.
I'm not blaming.
For centuries.
I'm noticing. Blacks started having out-of-wedlock marriage births. And that is why black people remain poor.
Yeah,
Asians don't do that. Jews don't do that.
You know what
as much.
I noticed? I noticed redline. I noticed the separations between neighborhoods where only people of the Caucasian race could live there, and only people.
So why is it that blacks
were
were getting wealthier when all that stuff was getting passed in the 50s?
It wasn't.
What was the single motherhood rate in 1963? How many blacks had fathers around in 1965? How many blacks?
I love how they frown when I'm getting you.
75% of blacks. 75% of blacks had dads around in 1975. Now 20% have it. That's not because of white men or white supremacy. It's because blacks started to abandoning the women they impregnated. And that's their fault, not the white man's fault. That's not racist, that's noticing.
Those are facts, dude.